Hello, I'm back with the follow-up to my previous video discussing 3 salient red flags, um, uh, dishonesty, mocking, and uh, um, uh, stealing. And I wanted to I wanted to follow up behind that just quickly. I'll do my best not to go that long, and just put a couple more insights into mocking, and then also briefly touch on stealing and dishonesty, just to provide some clarity for where I was coming with those statements of those being 3 salient red flags. But this is by no means comprehensive of any of those subjects or red flags. But it's just like a little insight into how significant they can be. And the first one, I guess I'll follow up with mocking, which is that if you think about I think in this video I want to talk about maybe the two most heinous things that can happen to a person or be done to a person. In my estimation, would be sexual misconduct and stealing. The reason that sexual misconduct is so heinous is because in a sexual encounter, we can't help but to participate in a sexual encounter. So even if someone touches you, you experience that touch, and you can't help but to identify with and respond to that touch, whether or not you had chosen to do that. So and that's the most simple. And then I won't obviously go further into what would be more heinous in that sense. But what is damaging about the point of what makes sexual misconduct so damaging is because we can sustain nearly any blow, insult, affront, setback, detriment as human beings. But what we really can't afford is to injure ourselves, because a friend or a relative, they know how to hurt you really well, but nobody can hurt you like you can hurt yourself. And so because no one has as much access to you as you have to yourself, but no one knows you as well as yourself. Any form of hurting a person that involves their own participation is the most that's the most damaging and egregious thing that can happen to a person. And so when you're talking about some form of sexual misconduct, or any a lot of times there you have when you have misconduct that has to do with either a breach of sexual misconduct or malinfluence. It involves either inciting or invoking another person to do damage against themselves to whatever degree, and that's what the real damage is. And on top of obviously any other damage that can come with that, but that's also somewhat related to mocking, because when you mock a person, you're using their own essence against them. Their own words, their own gestures, their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own faith, anything that is really unique to them, you're using that against them, and therefore, in a certain sense, they are being obliged to, or they're having their likeness used against them to damage them as the nearest pass at damaging a person. And that's what's also so heinous and detrimental about mocking, similar to sexual misconduct or abusing influence. And then the other thing with that is I wanted to talk about how significant stealing is. Now, stealing might not seem like that big of a deal, but it's really quite significant, because on the one hand, a lot of times we don't really understand what we talk a lot about, like how not to be materialistic and so forth, but we really don't understand how impactful a material object or something that we have earned or been gifted really amounts to our sustenance and our sustaining of our existence. If you've ever touched upon or been fallen upon hard times, real poverty or displacement or even homelessness, you may recognize how much something very simple can be to you. For example, if you were left to your own devices and homeless to some extent, yet you had an opportunity for job employment or some kind of education or training, yet something went wrong with your phone, or you didn't have access to a telephone, now you can't reach an opportunity, then time passes, then you lose that opportunity, then you're further bound in your situation. So something very simple like access to a telephone or a smart device or what have you can be very significant. So anything that belongs to us, on a certain extent, to a certain extent, it it factors into our actual destiny and the advantages that have been afforded to us all the way back through our ancestry, to our present family, our present friends, loved ones, people who have taken interest in us, our own efforts. Anything that actually is rightfully ours is quite significant. So if a person is to deprive us of that, that act in itself is one of the greatest affronts and indignities that can be that can be leveled on a person. And there's a very fine line between disrespect and violence. Usually violence is always attended by both disrespect and rationalization, leading into the disrespect and then following the disrespect, because this is a honest universe. And so we as human beings are honest, but we are yet afforded choice. So even when we make poor choices or egregious choices, we're still fundamentally honest, and therefore we must reckon with those choices. And that involves our conscience, which we must live with. So we one way or another, we either rationalize our way into doing misdeeds, and then we must also rationalize our ability to cope with and be with ourselves having done something egregious. But then, so just all I meant to say is that what makes stealing quite profound is because stealing involves some of the most forethought. Stealing is a really conscious effort. It's a conscious act. Usually there's a deliberation in stealing that makes it quite profound, that you recognize something belonged to someone, and then you chose to deprive them of that, knowing on some level or another that that was important to them, and that you are disabusing them of something that belongs to them through effort or grace. So that's quite significant. Then if you do stealing with property damage, that's as intense and maybe even more severe than an actual premeditated act of violence, simply because damage to property sometimes involves more forethought and even effort than damaging a human vessel. To damage a property, like to breach a property, or to do serious like something like arson, something like that, it takes some of the most effort and forethought at the same time. And one of the really scary things about crime, or about violence, more so than the actual physical act, is the thought that goes into it, the premeditation of it. Someone has been thinking about you intentionally with an intent to harm you. And in conscious thought, for whatever we put our minds to, our minds are very powerful. As the most, a person I once knew said that the mind is the most powerful muscle in the body. So when you have forethought and then you have effort, that's quite scary, and it can be seen in damage to theft of property that involves damage, as attendant and as severe as like premeditated violence. And then the other one was going to be a dishonesty. So I can't I can't do justice to dishonesty in this video, and my battery's getting low. But all I meant to say is that in this life, there are so many seething forces and factors all around us that make the fact that we are able to live quite profound. And within this, we are beset by so many dangers, most of which we're not aware of, yet we are afforded a life and the ability to make choices and learn from those choices, and also enjoy a little bit of life. And that comes by the different graces that surround us and protect us, and the fundamental of which would be our own honesty, which is that honesty can keep us out of a lot of things. And once honesty is compromised, all things are compromised. So I'll just leave that right there. But these are the three chief salient red flags: would be mocking, dishonesty, and theft. And I just want to go a little bit into that to share some light and where I'm coming from. But peace. I wish everyone honesty, hard work, and enjoyment that has been earned, and therefore greater enjoyed. Peace.